The biggest lie about black wealth. Black Americans among the wealthiest black populations in the world. So why does it feel like the opposite? Why is the dominant narrative one of constant economic struggle when the data tells a much more complicated story? And more importantly, what happens when we stop comparing black Americans only within the United States and start looking globally? Because that's where the conversation changes. And that's also where the conversation becomes uncomfortable. Not because the topic itself is uncomfortable, but because most people are used to looking at these issues through a very narrow lens, a local lens, an American lens. But the moment you zoom out globally, the picture starts to look very different. In the United States, discussions around black wealth are usually framed in one way: inequality. You've heard the stats: the racial wealth gap, differences in household income, disparities in home ownership, differences in net worth, and those numbers are real. Nobody's serious is denying that. But there's a problem with how these conversations are usually framed. Most of the comparisons are internal. Black Americans compared to white Americans, or compared to national averages. And once you frame the discussion that way, the conversation almost automatically becomes about deficiency, about what's missing, about who is behind. But what's almost never discussed is this: how do black Americans compare to the rest of the world? Not just emotionally, not symbolically, economically, globally. Because once you start comparing across systems instead of only within systems, the conversation changes. To answer that question properly, you have to zoom out, way out, because globally, economic baselines look very different. The United States, despite all of its inequalities and internal tensions, still operates within one of the most advanced economic systems in the world. That matters more than people realize. Access to capital, stable currency, established banking systems, property rights, broad access to education, legal infrastructure, financial institutions, credit systems, reliable utilities, to name a few. These things are so normalized in the United States that many people barely think about them. But globally, these things are not universal conditions. In many parts of the world, they barely even exist. And in some places, they don't exist at all. I've experienced this personally, having lived on multiple continents. When you spend enough time outside the United States, you start to realize something. Many Americans, regardless of race, underestimate how much economic infrastructure shapes opportunity. Because opportunity is not just about talent. It's also about the system surrounding the talent. Across large portions of sub-Saharan Africa, informal economies dominate. That means millions of people work outside formal banking systems. Income can be unpredictable. Access to credit is limited. Savings mechanisms are weaker. Property ownership can be unclear. Contracts may not always be enforceable. And even basic infrastructure can be inconsistent. In many parts of Latin America and the Caribbean, there are similar constraints. Smaller economies, fewer pathways to upward mobility, higher unemployment, currency instability, and in some cases, long-term political instability. Now, this doesn't mean that those people in those regions lack talent. Far from it. What it means is that the system itself creates different economic outcomes. That distinction is extremely important. But when you compare outcomes within the United States, comparing people operating inside this same broad economic framework, but when you compare globally, you're comparing entirely different systems, different institutions, different histories, different incentives, different levels of infrastructure, and that distinction matters a lot because there's a difference between relative disadvantage and absolute position. Relative disadvantage means you're worse off compared to the people around you. Absolute position means your actual standard of living on a global scale. And globally, black Americans are not at the bottom, not even close. In fact, many fall into income levels that place them among the higher tiers globally. Again, that does not erase inequality within the United States, but it also changes how we understand it, because context really does matter. And context is often missing from modern conversations. This is something like economist Thomas Sowell has emphasized for decades. Outcomes cannot be understood in isolation. You have to look at the full picture. History, geography, institutions, culture, incentives, migration patterns, family structure, education, all of these things interact. And once you begin looking at societies through that lens, simplistic explanations stop making sense. For example, why do some immigrant groups arrive in the United States with very little and still achieve high levels of success over time? Why do different groups operating within the same country end up with different outcomes? Why do some communities prioritize entrepreneurship while others prioritize stability? Why do some groups emphasize education at extremely high levels? These are difficult questions, but they're different, and I should say, important questions. Take Nigerian Americans. On average, they have some of the highest levels of educational attainment in the United States. In many cases, higher than the national average. Why? It's not random. It's part of something that evolved or called, I should say, selection effects. Migration itself is often selective. The people who uproot their lives and move across the world are often highly motivated. Many arrive with strong educational goals, strong family expectations, a willingness to sacrifice in short term for long-term advancement. You see similar patterns among Caribbean immigrant communities. Over time, many achieve strong economic mobility. Again, not because the system suddenly changed for them, but because behavior, expectations, incentives, and culture all play a role. And this is where the conversation often becomes uncomfortable, because modern discussions frequently try to explain outcomes using only one variable. But reality is rarely that simple. Human outcomes are shaped by multiple forces interacting simultaneously. Economic systems matter, government policy matters, culture matters, family structure matters, education matters, and incentive matters. Ignoring any one of these factors creates an incomplete picture. And yet, many modern conversations avoid complexity. Complexity doesn't fit neatly into political narratives. Nuances don't go viral. Simple explanations spread faster. But simple explanations are often incomplete, and incomplete explanations can produce bad results. So maybe the real question isn't simple, or simply, why does inequality exist? That question has already been asked many times and answered in many different ways. Maybe the better question is, what actually drives different outcomes between groups operating within the same system? And even more importantly, what can we learn from global comparisons that we're currently ignoring? Because when you expand the lens, when you stop looking at a single country in isolation, you begin to see broader patterns. Patterns related to incentives, patterns related to institutions, patterns related to long-term behavior, patterns related to economic structure. And those patterns are easy to miss when conversations become entirely emotional. Now, none of these means inequality doesn't exist. It does, and it matters. But understanding inequality requires more than outrage. It requires context, it requires comparison, it requires intellectual honesty, and sometimes it requires challenging narratives we've become emotionally attached to. Because understanding reality and reacting emotionally to reality are not always the same thing. And if the goal is progress, then understanding matters. Because the goal isn't just to describe reality, it's to understand it. If you want more breakdowns like this, grounded in reality, data, context, and global analysis, subscribe. This is just the beginning.